the insufficient tariff, which resulted in the incursion of sugar imports, especially from Brazil. This was mainly in 2018. We even embarked on a march to the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. We were marching there, like, yeah, I could march as well, never mind the size of my body. I took part in that. At the time, we had a tariff which was $566 per ton, and then we called for it to be $856 based on the cost of production. Eventually, we were granted by Uptake $680 per ton. That really gave us some relief, but there still continues to be challenges. Your sugar tax, the HPL, the Health Promotion Levy, which was introduced in April 2018. Since its introduction, we have suffered losses to the tune of at least 3.6 billion rand. Because some, mostly beverages manufacturers have been reformulating away from sugar as a result of the sugar tax. And then we've had challenges as well with the sugar imports from our neighbors, Eswatini. So those are a number of challenges which the industry has found itself under. So we thought really, is this the end of the industry? Because we're more like on the precipice, on the brink of collapse. What should be done? That's how the master plan was born. How do we get the sugar industry out of the ICU? And then we have panelists today who will shed light on what has happened, how the future looks like. Because the master plan, which was signed in November 2011, virtually in a ceremony which was presided over by Minister Ibrahim Patel and his counterpart, Minister Togotidiza, has really taken us out since its implementation of the ICU. We're still in hospital, but we're in stable condition. It's a bit critical, but stable. But the panelists who are here are going to shed light on that. Allow me to introduce our panelists. I'm not going to go, our panel members, I'm not going to go into detail and mention all their degrees. I think the numbers of degrees they hold can last us a lifetime. Firstly, I would like to introduce Sifiso Mhlaba. Sifiso Mhlaba is the is the National Market Executive at SASA. I will mention the highest degree he holds. He holds 2 masters, a master's in economics from Washington State University in America, and he holds, there he is on the screen, that's the guy I'm talking about on the screen, and he holds an MBA from Stellenbosch as well. He will be giving us an update on the master plan. And the next panel member that I will be speaking about is Dr. Marilyn Govender. He used to be a colleague responsible for renewable energy, our manager there, and natural resources, but currently Dr. Marilyn Govender, the real doctor, and you see on social media people give themselves doctorates. Dr. Marilyn Govender holds a PhD in natural science from Wits University. She's currently the head of diversification at South African Farmers Development Association. She'll go into detail in terms of what her organization represents, but she'll be speaking to the issue of the diversification approach by SAFTA in bringing about meaningful and sustainable future for black farmers. And to her left, I'm not talking about any ideological orientation. To her left is Andy Church. When I think about church, I'm always reminded about Jesus Christ. I'm a Christian, by the way, so yeah. Andy Church is the Technology and Innovations Manager at South African Cane Growers Association. Currently, he's involved in a project which is looking at cane juice production. He will be shedding some light on that. He holds a BSc in Agricultural Economics from UKZN. We shall hear from him in due course. And then we have Dr. Thomas Funke. I've known Dr. Thomas Funke for quite some time now. Dr. Thomas Funke is the CEO of Cane Growers Association. He holds a Doctor of Commerce from the University of Pretoria, and he's heavily involved in a number of issues in the industry which need expertise. And then he will be speaking to the issue of the sustainable aviation fuel. And lastly, we've got Dr. Kitty Foxy. I marvel when I looked at her CV, because at one point in my life, I wanted to be a chemical engineer, but that never came to pass. She holds a PhD in chemical engineering from UKZN, and she's currently a strategic research group leader at Sugar Milling Research Institute, which is based at the UKZN as far as I know, which ensures the sustainability of the sugar industry in the Southern Africa. She will be talking on a project she's working on, where they are looking at identifying diversification investment opportunities which the industry can consider. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, let's get right into it. In terms of time allocations, FISO will be speaking for 30 minutes, and the rest of the panel members will speak for 15 minutes each. Thereafter, we shall have a question and answer session. I hope this will be a very interactive and a lively conversation we're going to have. FISO will be hard pressed for time because he's currently attending a meeting of the Portfolio Committee, which belongs to the National Assembly, of the Portfolio Committee on Trade, Industry and Competition. They are discussing the issue of downstream beneficiation. Ladies and gentlemen, FISO will take us through the master plan now. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. Cedric, can you confirm if I'm audible?
Oh, yeah, you're audible. We can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do I need to put up the presentation, or will it be put up from that side?
You need to share your screen, I would imagine. He must share his screen, right? You share your screen, FISO. I think they've granted you the right.
Okay, thank you. Sharing now.
Can you raise your voice a bit, raise it a bit. I know you speak softly, but let's raise it a bit.
Is that much better, Cedric?
Perfect.
Okay, good. Please confirm if you can see my screen. All right.
Yeah, I can see it. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. And thank you for allowing me to be part of the convention. Unfortunately, I'm coming to you from Pretoria, and I could not travel for medical reasons, and I do miss the sunny shores of Devon. I hope you enjoy them on my behalf. I've been asked today just to give an overview of the all-important master plan. I must indicate today I'm the curtain raiser. I'll really be providing high-level overview. I think the more important and forward-looking interventions you will hear from the panelists that is in front of you. As Cedric indicated, over the last 10 years, the industry has faced quite a number of challenges arising from imports, drought, and it was really at the brink of collapse. This necessitated intervention by all stakeholders across the value chain, led by government, and a master plan was crafted and signed, as Cedric has indicated. What I've put on screen is really the objective of the master plan. And the master plan seeks to create a diversified, sustainable, and transformed sugar-based value chain. I think what's key here is either plateauing or going to be reducing. And therefore, we need to move to a sugarcane-based industry, hence the significant focus on diversification. Sustainability and competitiveness are always part of a growing industry, and that is included in the objective. Just a high level in terms of the process, up until September 2019, and this is after the strike that was very well led by Cedric, we really started a point of engaging around how can the industry be saved. And unlike in prior occasions, this engagement involved all the stakeholders. This was the industry stakeholders, the growers, the millers, SASA, as well as government and downstream. There was a recognition that no one stakeholder can save the industry. And given it's important to job creation, it's important as an input into downstream industries, it is in the best interest of all stakeholders to save the sugar industry. And in November 2019, SASA was then requested to apply for designation of the sugar industry. This, in terms of the regulation, is to designate as an industry in distress and therefore allow interventions by government to be activated. In June 2020, a high level of the master plan was gazetted for comment, and in October 2020, the sugar industry competition exemption was received. These were all the key legislative requirements to enable us to really discuss what needs to be done, as well as activate the interventions as envisaged in the master plan. Cedric did indicate the master plan was signed, albeit virtually, in November 2020, and in January 2021, the task teams basically began the work. I'll go into the task teams and the commitments now, but the master plan has always been Vision 2030. There was a recognition that it needs to be split into two phases. The first phase, which ends in March 2023, was really to save and stabilize the industry, ensure that we take the industry out of ICU so that we can plan for a future. It was recognized that discussing diversification and long-term prospects when industry players are going out of business was not the right approach. As we are now towards the end of phase one, there is a strategic review of what we've achieved and what is yet to be achieved, and this will inform phase two that will kick off from next year, April. In terms of stakeholders, there's been an unprecedented buy-in from the number of stakeholders, as you can see. Obviously, all the industry stakeholders, the grower associations and the millers have signed on the master plan. We have support and participation from the beverage sector, as well as Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and Tiger brands. We also have support and participation from the Consumer Goods Council, as well as the large retailers. Some of the independent retailers have not yet participated, but we understand they've expressed support. We also have interaction with the labor unions, who, whilst they have not formally signed the master plan, we do know that they are interacting with government in order to lend the support that they can towards the process. I think at this point, as some stakeholders may be aware, the master plan process has been Minister Patel and broadly government's approach to getting industries to interact and to intervene. It is a social compact, so it is not a legally binding document, but it brings stakeholders to discuss what is necessary, what each stakeholder can bring, and what each stakeholder can benefit. Minister Patel has called this a bring and buy arrangement. In terms of the master plan, it was split into two. So we have about 7 action commitments, and there is now 10 task teams that were set up to achieve this commitment. In terms of the commitment, and again, looking at the fact that the industry was in ICU, one of the first and the most important commitment was to restore local market offtake. This followed a significant reduction in terms of the HPL impact, as well as the imports that had displaced South African share of the market. In order to support that local market offtake, the industry was requested to commit to producer price restraint. This effectively was to agree that the price of sugar will increase at the maximum of CPI for the first phase, so the period of 3 years. And again, to support all of these commitments, government committed to ensure strategic trade protection. This was to ensure that whilst there is a commitment to buy locally and the producers have committed to restrain their price, government would ensure that the deep sea imports are not allowed into the country. So there is strategic trade protection to allow the country to benefit from the commitments. There was also a commitment around job retention and mitigation, a commitment to support the ever-important small-scale grower fraternity, and a commitment to pursue and strengthen the transformation interventions that the industry had already started. One key commitment was to ensure that the industry embarks on a restructuring plan. This again was based on the realization that being a sugar industry will not give us sustainability. We need to move towards a sugarcane-based industry. And this needed a deep dive into what are the issues facing the stakeholders and what needs to be done in order to ensure that we meet our objective. In terms of the task teams, initially there were 7 task teams that were put, SACCO harmonization, and this was really to look at the trade dynamics within SACCO. As you'd know, Eswatini is also a producer of sugar, whilst we have Botswana, Lesotho, and Namibia as part of SACCO, but they do not produce sugar. Task team 2 was looking at job retention and mitigation strategies. And task team 3 was set up to look at the small-scale grower issues as well as develop a master plan for that sector. There was a task team on transformation, crop diversification, and a diversification strategy for the downstream. I think this is where the panel will focus on task team 6. So I'll say, I will not say a lot on this, then we'll leave it to the panel. You may also be aware of the HPL. So there was a task team 7, that was convened to look at alternative proposals instead of the tax to ensure that the industry is able to remain sustainable while balancing the health concerns that have been raised. Task team 8 was set up to look at the industry restructuring, and this I'll touch on a bit later. I think what I'd also like to indicate here is some of the task teams are operating under competition exemption, meaning that the information data being discussed at this stage cannot be shared publicly. I will share only the highlights just to give flavor of where the discussions are going. What you see on the screen is really the intricacies and interdependencies between all the task teams and their work. I think when the master plan commenced, each task team was working on its own, but we very soon realized that in order to make it a success, there is dependencies and interlinkages between all the task teams, and there is a need to ensure that there's clear alignment between all the task teams. Structurally, in order to ensure that we achieve this, there is then a conveners meeting where the conveners of all the 10 task teams meet every second week to engage and share progress, as well as identify bottlenecks that need intervention from either other task teams as well or government intervention. Now I'll move over to some of the progress that we've made in the first phase of the master plan. As indicated, the first and key objective was to really restore market offtake. This was to ensure that South African producers sell more into the local market as opposed to exporting the sugar at a loss. And the target for the first year was 150,000 tons, and this was exceeded. So in the first year, we managed to sell 170 odd tons more into the local market. This was positive, and it gave all the stakeholders hope that the master plan could indeed change the fortunes of the industry as well as the value chain. We are currently in year 3, and the target is to restore 300,000 tons. So this would essentially take our sales into the local market from 1.25 million tons before the master plan to about 1.55 million tons. As of July 2022, we do see some progress in the market, but it is not clear yet if this target will be achieved. And I think it's important to also understand there's been multiple externalities. The floods experienced earlier this year in KZN affected the mills and they had to stop for a couple of weeks. As we all experience as consumers, we are under significant economic pressure following multiple external developments such as the war in Ukraine. So we continue to monitor this. I think ultimately there has been an improvement, but it is not clear whether the actual target will be met. All the stakeholders have confirmed their commitment towards working towards achieving this goal. What you'll see on the screen is really just to put the numbers and the goals into context, and you'll see these are the 3 years of the master plan, including the current year where we are showing the estimates. The blue part of the bar graph is the sales into South Africa by South African producers. And we are seeing the increase. However, it's not clear whether we'll reach the target. But I do think we are certainly in a much better position than we would be if it was not for the master plan. Another critical element of the master plan was deep sea imports, and these are imports coming from outside SACU and outside SADC. These are represented by the green portion of the bar, and you'll see in the earlier seasons, these were quite significant, reaching 500,000 tons in 17-18. However, they have been reducing. Over the last 4 years, the imports have been below 40,000 tons per season. I think that is a significant achievement, and we encourage and continue to work with government to ensure that this remains the case. The black dotted line shows the level of exports. And again, this is the sugar that is the focus of diversification, because as indicated, this sugar is exported at a loss. I indicated earlier that one of the task teams is looking at the small-scale grower fraternity, and this is to ensure that small-scale growers have been recognized as foundational to the master plan, and they play a critical role in supporting the communities, and the industry wishes to ensure that they remain sustainable. In the short term, the task team approved a premium of approximately 60 million that was paid out to small-scale growers in January 2022. This amount has been increased to 63 million for the current season. I think what's important here to understand is the price intervention were the first step. It was a short-term engagement to save the small-scale growers, whilst medium to long-term interventions are being sought. There's currently a survey that is looking to engage with approximately 700 small-scale growers throughout the industry to really get to grips with understanding the challenges they face. And from that survey, long-term interventions will then be developed and implemented in phase 2 of the master plan. In terms of numbers, it's important to note that 13,000 growers benefited from the 60 million that was paid out in January 2022. Again, this is only the master plan portion. The industry spends an additional 300 million rand in supporting small-scale growers per annum. So there's significant support that is going to the SSGs, and hopefully in the medium to long term, this will include structural changes to ensure that they remain viable. As mentioned, Task Team 6 is looking at diversification. There is multiple, I think about 10 products that are being looked at. One of them is sustainable aviation fuel, which I'm sure Thomas will speak in detail about. What has become clear from Task Team 6 is that there is a need for government to rethink alternative policy support and mechanisms. Having looked at a number of the countries that have diversified, it's clear that diversification cannot happen without government support. However, there is a need to then go through the evaluation and research phase to inform the options, as well as ensure and understand what government support is needed so that government can activate that support. As indicated, the panel will be discussing the different options in detail. Other task teams that are at play is the industry restructuring. Again, this is the task team that is looking at the future of the industry. Ultimately, the task team needs to look at the size of the industry. It needs to look at whether the industry needs to shrink or to grow, and what incentives need to be put in place. And this task team will be having a workshop and has received contributions and submissions from Task Team 6 and Task Team 5. Unfortunately, the work of this task team is exempted, and at this stage we cannot share in detail what the options are. And the task team 4 is looking at transformation, and a transformation consultant was appointed to work with the task team to look at options, as well as develop a strategy that will be considered by the task team in terms of long-term transformation of the industry. Task Team 7 is looking at the HPL, as well as broadly other concerns around front of pack warning labels, and will be making recommendations to government that will balance both the health concerns as well as the sustainability of the industry. In conclusion, there's various task teams that are busy with research and consultation. This includes the development of the SSG master plan, the restructured vision of the industry, including transformation, the evaluation of diversification options, and government support and policy that is required to support the industry. The structure and approach to phase 2 will be discussed by the social partners and will be agreed towards the end of the year. I think what the master plan has done is really bring all the stakeholders into one room under one common theme. Whilst there may be different views and different ideas, but we're all working together towards achieving a diversified sugarcane-based industry. And this is across the sector and across the value chain. Some people have asked if the master plan has worked or phase 1 has worked. I certainly think the industry is in a much better position with a master plan than without. Of course, there has been some achievements, the increase in sales, particularly in the first year, and the positive sentiments that are in the market, the support to small-scale growers, but there's also been some derailments and challenges. There's been limited movement in terms of SACCO harmonization, but all of these are work in progress and should be taken into phase 2. Cedric, thank you very much. I hope I provided some high-level view, and hope you'll enjoy the rest of the presentations from the technical experts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sfiso. I know in less than 180 seconds you have to attend the meeting of the Portfolio Committee on Trade, Industry and Competition, so you are released. Thank you. Thank you to those who have joined us. I see the numbers are growing of the audience. We appreciate that. Without any further delay, I would like to call upon Dr. Marilyn Govender to the podium.
Good morning, conference delegates, and to my industry colleagues as well. Thank you very much, Cedric. And Sofiso has done such an excellent job of giving us an overview of the Sugarcane Value Chain Master Plan. As Cedric had introduced me, I'm part of the South African Farmers Development Association, and SAFTA represents the black growers, small-scale and land reform growers in the industry and into other commodities as well. But today we're talking about sugarcane, and I want to just share in my short presentation a little bit of our thoughts around diversification and also how we're linking up in terms of the industry and the master plan opportunities. So thank you for attending and listening to what we have to share. I thought I'd just spend a few minutes just sharing with you around what are some of SAFTA's strategic focus areas so that you can see how we're fitting into the industry and what is passionate, what is on our hearts as an organization. And SAFTA being an organization that really seeks to drive transformation and development, that actually underpins everything that we do in terms of projects, initiatives, and how we'd like to see and bring about change within the sugarcane industry and the processing sector as well. And so there's participation in terms of industry level conversations, policies, and transformational matters as well, but then also with our growers. You heard about support being provided in 2023 of around 13,000 small-scale growers, probably those that delivered in the season. But I think there's a number of around 18,000 or so, Cedric, of small-scale growers in our industry. They're very much foundational to the industry and part of even the Sugarcane Value Chain Master Plan. We have land reform growers as well. And so there's targeted support that SAFTA provides to these growers, including grower capacity development. And then a very critical aspect, and many commercial farmers would also agree with this, is that access to funding does not come easy. And it becomes even more challenging when you're a small-scale producer. And so there's a lot of focus on how do we look at ways in which we can get access to funding for our farmers so that they can farm, they can be more sustainable, and how can they also access programs and initiatives even linked to diversification. And then the last strategic focus area speaks to how do we drive down costs for our farmers, but at the same time looking to increase their revenue streams and look at increasing their sustainability. So programs like bulk buying, going into the value chain in terms of logistics, which are very high cost drivers for farmers, and then diversification as well falls into that as well. How do we open up the markets and get them, get their cane crop more highly beneficiated? So I just thought it's important to start off with that context. And of course, at the heart of what SAFTA wants to do is to work within the broader sugarcane industry, work in the rural sugarcane farming areas, and how do we bring about these communities being more viable, thriving, rural communities. And so that's at the heart of also, and that's going to speak to some of our thoughts around diversification as well. And I thought I'd start off here. I've just taken a general picture and shared this. So this is not an industry picture. But the reality is when you start talking diversification, and I'm just going to move more into diversification now, when you start talking about diversification and creating value, just from sugarcane, I know there's been lots done on multiple crops, but the reality is that a lot has been done over the decades. I've got my colleague Kitty Foxy here from SMRI, and she'll probably attest to that, but within the industry, within members of the industry, by academia and research institutes, there's been a huge amount of research, all at different levels of development, and so this is not new. So what we're sharing with you today is not new, but we're trying to crystallize or get to some sort of trajectory where we're moving ahead with products that are probably more viable and can be implemented by the industry. The other point I wanted to share is that, sorry, my eyes are a bit poor. I can't really see right down there, so I'm just going to move to my paper. So I think another very important point to share is that in doing all of this research, and this is one of the benefits that have come out from this master plan process, is that there's been a lot of research being done, pre-feasibility work, scoping, etc., within the various team players. That is the reality. A lot of industry work has been done in the past around cogeneration and around bioethanol. In my previous hat, was actually, very much a part of that, and really some good work. But when it came to looking holistically as an industry at opportunities, of which there are many, probably the Sugarcane Value Chain Master Plan Initiative and Task Team brought us together as an industry, growers and millers, represented government and so on, so that we could work together in terms of diversification and come up with some of the priority products that we would like to consider. We can't go into a lot of detail of that in this audience because we are under confidentiality agreements under the master plan, but certainly there are particular categories that we're moving ahead in. And so I think that's important to share because it's a very positive statement to make as an industry. We've come together to look at these opportunities. So I just thought before I go into some of the messages we want to share from SAFTA's approach is that under the value chain, under the Sugarcane Value Chain Master Plan or the framework, that Task Team 6 that Sofiso referred to has done a fair amount of good work as a collective, and there are several projects that are running, and even as individual sectors of the industry, we've identified particular products that we think we really want to move beyond scoping and feasibility. We want to move along the project development stages towards commercialization. And I'm mentioning that because sometimes, because there's so much of research that's been done in the past, there's been so much conversations had around diversification of this industry. I think there's some stakeholders that also question whether we are serious about it. So that's important to share as well. How it's done is another question. And also I thought, I'm not going into products because there's a lot of commonality amongst the industry members as what we see important. And that's also good because then we're not working in different directions in terms of bringing about some of the change that's very much needed in the industry. So the list is not exhaustive, but it goes into various areas. Thomas will be sharing around some of the opportunities in terms of beneficiating ethanol. Ethanol has always been on the table. It requires support, whether it's going into road or possibly other value-added streams. There's bioplastics and biopackaging and some particular products under that we're looking at. There's your value-added that goes into the health and chemical sector, etc. And then, of course, even in terms of your fiber streams into cogeneration. And we all know some of the major energy crisis and electricity crises that we are experiencing in the country. There's definitely the opportunity for cogeneration from our factories, from our mills, to become part of that renewable energy mix. And so that's also another opportunity that we need to grow from the industry. And then I wanted to just share in terms of, from SAFTA's side, what we also see important in terms of factors that are informing diversification. And I think this is also quite important because, as I mentioned earlier, that we have a large spread of growers in our industry. And I'm going to even share a little in a short while around some of our nuggets that we took back from a recent visit to India. And location is key. Location is very important because what we find is that we have a large number, now I'm talking about the small-scale growers, I'm talking about some of the black farmers, where their cane is transported a long distance to the existing mills. and transport costs is a huge part of whether they remain in this industry, whether they remain viable and sustainable. So location, that's something that SAFTA is driving hard, and we're going to look at quite critically as we look at diversification opportunities. We also believe there's a big opportunity to grow the participation in the agri-processing value chain. We don't want to just be providers of feedstock. We believe there's an opportunity to really participate in the agro-processing value chain. Market is very important. We know that the sugar market is established. We know that even when it comes to the sugar market, that other uses of sugar is already on the table. And so the market has been changing over time, and getting into some of these new products, we have to make sure that the market is there and that we can grow the market, whether it's local or whether it's an export market. Scale again is very important, and I'm going to link that up with some of our learnings from India. And I think what's very important is that for South Africa and for our growers, we start implementing models that are relevant for our growers, because many of the sugarcane industries globally have already diversified. But how you implement some of their diversification models into South Africa might not always be relevant. So I think we need to look at opportunities where there's a bit of like for like. There's similarities in terms of their industries, their growers, and our industry and our growers. And so scale is an important one. Technology, very important. It's good to do local technology research and development. We're fully supportive of that. But we also do think that it's, this whole focus on the master plan was to take this industry out of the ICU. And so something has to be done within a reasonable time frame. And so we're supportive of commercial technology plays. We're supportive of localizing commercial technology as well in South Africa, so that we can make this happen and we can accelerate projects in diversification. Cost of investment, obviously critical. Projects can raise from a couple of millions of rands to a couple of billions of rands. And so, what can be raised, what's viable for South Africa, even in terms of investment, is critical. Volume of feedstock, how much of feedstock is available. I've spoken about financial viability, and of course sustainability being critical. And now I just want to move into some of the few nuggets that we took back as SAFTA, as a team that visited India just probably over a month ago. And this is what we saw. We've heard about it before, we've read about it, but we actually saw how it's being done. And the reality is that it really demystified how sugar milling and processing and distilling is being done in India. There are over 500 sugar mills and distilleries in India located in the heart of the rural sugarcane farming areas. Within a distance of around 20 or 30 kilometers, you have small-scale growers, farmers that are supplying that cane to that facility or processing facility or biorefinery. And so their transport distance is minimized immediately. What we even learned is that their cane could be transported within a day, crushed within a day, and they are even paid within a week. So, when you start looking at viability, when you start looking at how do you think differently of how do you implement some of the projects, SAFTA is seriously looking at these opportunities and how do we make it more viable for our growers as well. So there's really some nuggets and some lessons that we took back from India, being an industry that has already successfully diversified. This is not pie in the sky stuff. They've implemented these plants, they've got technologies going, they are producing the products with good support from their government, and their farmers are benefiting from these opportunities as well. I think another one, just to, as I move slowly towards concluding, is that they have maximized the value of their sugarcane. We have talked about this for decades in South Africa. We need to do sugar, we need to do electricity, we need to do ethanol, biogas, biofertilizer, waste streams going into power, and many, many more. And some of my colleagues are going to be sharing about that, some of these other products. But they've done it. They look at a circular model where you have zero water, zero waste discharge, and you really are capturing the full value of your sugarcane stock and maximizing your revenue streams back to your millers and your growers. And so you have these hundreds of mills, and most of them, the standard products is sugar, electricity, and ethanol. And so it's a very different business model to what we have in South Africa. And that's what we're saying from the South African sugar industry as well. Diversification needs to happen. It can't just be sugar, and we need to produce these other products, and hence there's this drive from SAFTA, from the industry players, to produce these alternative products with the support of our partners. Okay, you can't really see the text too clear, but the message that I wanted to share there as well is that the technology exists. We want to support development of technology in South Africa, but we also believe that in some areas we need to localize commercial technology, because these commercial plants do exist in other parts of the world, and we need to bring it in if it would enable us to diversify quicker, and of course still being financially viable in doing so. So a couple of take-home messages as I wrap up. From SAFTA side, a few take-home messages that I'd like to leave with you is that SAFTA definitely supports and is fully behind diversification, behind the master plan, but we would seriously be looking at an opportunity of supporting diversification in the heart of the rural sugarcane farming areas. We've seen it work, and we need to look out of the box. We need to look with our eyes open how we can make it work for these farmers. And it's the same farmers. I mean, if you think about it, and if you make them more sustainable and you grow their economic value share, it has a significant impact on KZN, on Mpumalanga, and at the country at large. So we believe that by doing so, you reduce their transport costs. You would also have an impact on the quality of their feedstock going to the facilities. We believe it's time to have new and efficient factories and biorefineries. I'm not going to go into the state of existing mills, but we all know that there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of new technologies, having more efficient mills, so that at the end of the day, we are more financially viable as well. And then I've already spoken much about transformation in the agri-processing value chain. Another very important departure point that I'd like to leave with you is, from SAFTA side, we believe that we do not need to do this alone. As industry members, we should do this with the right strategic partners in the new value chains. Doing it alone, or trying to do it alone, we're surely going to fail. And that's our approach. We're open to have discussions with strategic partners, new business partners, because we know that this cannot be done alone. So, even in India, we saw how for ethanol to work, you had the enabling environment from government, but when it came to ethanol, you had all the right players, not just from the sugarcane industry side, but also from the fuel side, in the same business structure. So I think that's very important. Strategic partnerships, and even in these new markets that we seek to go into, we need to have those partnerships coming on board, so that in 3 years' time, you don't have a similar panel just saying the same thing to you, but we've actually made a change and something new has happened. I think also just some closing statements around how things have changed over the last 10 to 15 years. If you spoke about greener products, alternative bio-based products about 15 years ago, it was still more theory-based, very few commercial examples, and very limited global pressure. Things have changed now, and the market is slowly growing for many of these products. Commercial examples have increased. So there's an increased appetite, definitely, to have your alternative bio-based products, greener products, compared to your traditional product lines or compared to your traditional fossil-based. So that again, it shows that the timing is right. We need to get on board, and we need to tap into these new alternative product streams and revenue streams. But it does mean that we do need support from our government. We need support, we need incentives and mechanisms to kickstart a lot of what we need to do, including the likes of the biofuels program that needs to happen in South Africa. So thank you very much. Thanks for listening and for your time. Anybody wants to connect, you're welcome to. Those are my details. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Marilyn Govender. Thank you. We welcome those who've just joined us. Just remember that you can jot down some notes, and then you'll get an opportunity to ask questions once everyone has spoken in the panel. We just made sure that we don't put UKZN next to each other, because Thomas there from University of Pretoria is making sure that we're separating Dr. Kitty Foxy and Andy, because Andy as well, graduate of UKZN, Agricultural Economics, BSc. But I know that Dr. Marilyn Govender as well, one of your masters are from there, UKZN, right? What dominance. Anyway, can we have Andy to speak on the issue of cane juice production?
Good morning, everybody. I feel somewhat intimidated here. I think I'm the only mister on the panel. The rest have all got long qualifications. So I've taken a little bit of a more practical slant to this presentation and stayed away from anything technical. My passion is really around agriculture and new technology that's around. And my focus has been to try and look at opportunities to try and add value within the sugar industry. Okay, so when you're talking about cane juice, really there basically are two opportunities. One in a form of clear concentrated cane juice with a brix concentration of between 20 going up to 60%, which can be used as a feedstock for alcohol production, as Marilyn mentioned previously. Another option is looking at it as an additive into the fruit juice market, which I'll talk about briefly next. And then as a raw cane juice. And the two sort of options that spring to mind there are for direct consumption and also for home distilling. Whilst these markets are quite small, they are alternative products, and there are now a couple of rum distilleries that are opening up in the cane growing areas. I think they're steering away from gin because it's a saturated market, but there are currently two, Marlborough rum and Topanga rum and Sugar Baron, that are operating, but these markets are very small. So I'm not really talking about sugar as obviously coming out of the cane juice. I'm steering clear of that. So if we have a look at alcohol production, when you're taking the cane juice, you've got to evaporate it and get it down to a higher brix concentration. More importantly, you've got to look at sterilization. This doesn't necessarily apply for those that want to go into home industry distillery, because you want the wild yeasts to add a bit of flavor to your ethanol. But from a commercial perspective, you need to actually get rid of those wild yeasts, because sometimes they do impact on the fermentation process, and most of the industrial producers want to put their own yeasts in to ensure maximum fermentation and alcohol production. I'm going to not really focus too much on this sector, but rather look at the cane juice concentrate. The one fairly exciting opportunity that kind of did present itself was around clear deflavored cane juice as a substitute into the fruit juice market. We know that we can produce it, and one of the milling companies a while ago did do quite a lot of research around it. Having said that, the objective wasn't to actually displace the current sugar that previously used to be added into fruit juices, but rather try and grow the market. So that's the market size in terms of that is not that large, but it's enough to warrant investigation, and it would be looking at, I guess for simple terms, displacing the apple, grape, or pear juice concentrate that is used for blended fruit juices. And this is primarily driven along cost factors. However, if one looks at the definition of juice and what you can put in your labels, the basic definition for any product to be called a juice is it's got to be an extract from either vegetable or fruit. And as sugarcane is a grass, I'm not too sure if anybody were aware of that, but in actual fact it's a grass. So in terms of the strict definition, we actually can't sell it as sugarcane juice. So a little bit of a technicality there. That particular act is actually under review, and we have put our hand up to say, could it be classified as a juice? We feel that if it is, it might open up other marketing opportunities for the product. Unfortunately, with the health promotion levy, it really makes this option very expensive and not competitive. So if one has a look at it, for us right now, it's not really something that is worth investigating any further. When it was looked at a few years ago, there was a little bit of hesitancy from the fruit industry purely around the unknown impact that a clear deflavored cane juice might have on their products, but nothing insurmountable. So I kind of want to talk a little bit more around our cane juice as a drink. It's our little, I wouldn't say it's our hobby, but we feel quite passionately about it. It kind of ticks some of the boxes around the master plan. But we had a bit of a philosophy around it, is we wanted to look at something different. We wanted to have a product that was natural, healthy, and free of any preservatives. Obviously locally produced, and adding value to the sugar industry. We do know that certainly sugarcane juice as a drink is very well known in Asia, in the Far East, and in Central and South America. But there's a bit of a question mark around how well it's actually known in South Africa. I think from a sugarcane producing provinces of KwaZulu-Natal and Mpumalanga and Eastern Cape, the old Transkei area, people are familiar with cane. I think if you have to go look through any of those rural areas where cane is grown, you normally see a bit of a trail of where everybody's been chewing it. So people are familiar with the taste, but they've never really been exposed to it as an actual drink. So with that in mind, we said, well, what are the options available to us? So we looked at it as what we would call a functional water. I think that's just marketing jargon because we cannot call it sugarcane juice. We did initial sort of market studies around just the plain product, and it was pretty well received in the high-end market. We were looking at it more as a stilled product, not carbonated, with some flavorants and vitamins added. And it was very much a low volume, kind of a high margin market sector. The other option is looking at it as an energy drink, and we're certainly quite excited about it. The market is much bigger. As we all know that the energy drinks is one of the fastest and largest growing market segments worldwide and within South Africa. I think currently figures of around about 250 million litres of energy drink is what the official volumes are, but if you chat to some of the industry players, they think it's closer to 500 million, mainly because there are a lot of outlets that don't go through the formal structures of the retail sector. The problem with that market is it's very, very, very competitive, and it's something that we are busy working on and well aware of it. And there are always new products coming on. I think if you go into any one of the shops, there's always a new energy drink coming onto the market. So it's quite a competitive and tight space to operate in. Just quickly going back to what are the characteristics of the main cane juice. Raw cane juice, the bricks percentage is around about 15 to 20%, but it's extremely volatile. For drinking purposes, we looked at different percentages, and we found that 8% seemed to hit the mark, but you've got to stabilize it. We have had samples analyzed, and it came out with an energy content of 139 kilojoules per 100 grams. It can be classified as a medium GI index. We might argue we'd like to see it as a low GI. I think low GI is classified at below 51 units. So it's not too bad. It's 100% natural with no preservatives. And it's rich in antioxidants. So generally it actually is quite healthy. Just some photographs of some of our research that we did. The top left was the distilled water, the functional water, looking at different flavors. The bottom was when we looked at going into the energy juice market. It's the same color, but it's all got different flavorants. We did use additives just as part of the trial because to try and pasteurize makes it a little bit lengthy and difficult, but it hasn't really impacted on the taste. This is really for research purposes. And on the right, we have done a trial bottling run in one of the facilities up in Richmond. Some of the branding that we're looking at, we did put beer flavor there, but in fact we're not looking at a beer flavor. That was just our marketing lady playing around a little bit. We feel it's quite catchy, it's something unique. We want to position ourselves as a little bit as a premium product and bring it back to our local sort of roots in KZN. The Mpumalanga people might not like that, but that's our view. Just in terms of the production challenges for producing the raw cane juice, it needs to be fresh, it must be peeled and kept clean. One of the other challenges we actually did find is because the volumes that we're looking at are quite low, is finding a small cane crusher. They're not manufactured here in South Africa. You've got to look to China or India. We were fortunate to pick up a nice second-hand one that we could refurbish at a low cost. You need to cut the ends off just to make sure that there's no bacterial infection. As you might be aware, the moment you burn cane or you cut it and it stops growing, your deterioration starts happening at that point straight away. The microbial activity is very rapid. If you take some cane juice, you crush it and you put it out into the sunlight, within 5 minutes you already see the discoloration taking place. So it needs to be stabilized as soon as possible. And we've opted to go the pasteurization route as opposed to adding any additives, although we haven't ruled that out depending on what the market's looking for. As a means to preserving it. And what we have found is we're getting well above 3 months worth of shelf life once it's been pasteurized in situ. So in conclusion, the concentrated cane juice, really the market lies on the alcohol side, and very limited to the home brew, and unfortunately not in the fruit sector at this particular point in time. However, we do feel as a cane juice there are exciting opportunities. We are starting off looking at the energy market, drink market, purely because it's big, and we feel it'll be an easier way to enter into the market. We haven't really finalized the marketing strategy. We've really just trying to finalize our actual flavor. So some of our market research is ongoing. And we've got to refine our costs. We are well aware that the energy drink market is very cost competitive. So we were more focused on trying to get a product that we felt the market would like, and then work backwards to try and refine our costs. We're getting there, but we are going to be quite a small player. I mean, our initial sort of estimates are around about probably less than 1% of the market. But at least it's a foot in the door, and we're hoping that from there we'd be able to grow it into something more exciting. It is a small production level, so it's not going to remove any of the export surplus sugar that we're trying to find a home for. But it is an exciting project that we feel will just add a little bit of value to the growing community and make a little bit of money. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy. I think this is the energy drink I've been looking for. Because other energy drinks, your Red Bull, Monster and everything, they've got the opposite effect on me. I actually like sort of fall asleep, and then my wife has to take over driving. When you need me for sampling that, you've got my number, Andy. At this juncture, I would like to call upon Thomas, Dr. Thomas Funke, to brief us. Thank you.
Thank you. Wait for the slide. There we go. Okay. Yeah, my talk is really about the opportunities that sustainable aviation fuels offer to the sugar industry. Quite a bit of work has gone into this, and as Safisa had highlighted earlier, this is one of the major projects within Task Team 6 of the master plan. So I'll take you through that and also show you where you can download some of those studies that have already been done. This is the reality. So the floods in KZN, the drought in Europe currently, all of this are linked to climate change. And the predictions are that if we don't do anything now, and if we don't start working on solutions, as in every one of us, it'll just get worse. The droughts will get worse. The floods will get worse. And that's really why we decided to try and drive a sustainable alternative for the sugar industry. But I think helping us along is really this projection and these goals set by not just the European countries, but many other countries in North America, South America, as well as Asia. So if you see on that slide, everyone is driving towards a carbon neutral sort of footprint by 2050. What we've seen also is that many of the airlines are being mandated from 2027 onwards to start blending aviation fuel or sustainable aviation fuel into their product mix, because airlines, unlike cars, are one of those transport modes that cannot use batteries to function. So I think in the car sector we'll see mass electrification. For the South African context, it's obviously debatable if that's sustainable, but we're seeing that already in Europe. And the link and the opportunity for us here is that in the aviation sector that's not possible, and we want to be part of the solution and climb, I guess, onto this bandwagon of supplying this massive sector with a sustainable alternative. Now, you've heard a lot about the sugar industry in South Africa, and I thought maybe it's good to take you back and just to show you where you are at this conference venue. You're pretty much in the middle of it. But really some history around it. The industry was officially established in 1927. That's when the Fahi conference took place. There was a lot of fighting between growers and millers at the time. The relationship is pretty unique because none of the two role players can function without the other. So in other words, a mill without sugarcane is useless. And the grower who produces the sugarcane needs to do something with his cane. He can't store it. So when he harvests it, it has to be processed into something else. And that's really why he needs the miller to process the sugarcane. But officially, cane production started in KZN in the 1800s. The industry also then grew bigger, and the peak of our hectares under sugarcane were about 440,000 hectares. Currently, we are 384,000, and we've got a surplus of sugarcane. Those of you who follow the media would see what the financial position is of some of the milling companies that are in sugar. And that has obviously led to a cost-cutting approach, which meant that we've lost 2 sugar mills in our industry. The Darnell mill and the Mzamkhulu mill closed down. And as a result, there's too much sugarcane available, and growers are struggling to get the entire crop harvested and processed, and as a result, they are also getting into financial difficulties. But enough of that. If we look at our production areas, those red circles are the irrigated areas. We've got pretty much 4 mills that are 100%, or 4 cane supply areas, 2 mills that are 100% irrigated. That's Komati and Malalan and Mpumalanga. Then we've got Pongola just south of Eswatini in northern KZN, and then Umfolozi, the Umfolozi Flats. There's been a lot of media coverage around that also, but they are also largely irrigated. The dryland areas are really along the coast, stretching from Zululand, and that's Empangeni, Richards Bay area, right down to Port Shepstone and even Port Edward. So quite a long stretch, and then also into the Midlands, around Pietermaritzburg, there are at least 2 mills, or 3 mills actually, that process cane that is then grown on a longer cycle, so that's a 24-month cycle. Okay, then we look at the value chain. There was a lot of discussion from Marilyn around what that is. And currently the sugar industry only deals with sugar and molasses within its framework. And sugar isn't just sugar. You've got refined sugar, and you've got VHP, which is brown sugar for human consumption, and then we've got our export sugar component, which is raw sugar. And that gets exported onto the world market. The world market price is the number 11 price, traded in New York. And a lot of that sugar is then sold on to other refineries in the world who purchase it at that discounted price and then produce their own refined sugar. At the moment, we've got markets mainly in the USA. We've got a quota there, as well as Europe and the UK. Europe is actually currently suffering that big drought, and as a result, they've got a bit of a sugar shortage going on there. So we're getting really good value for our export sugar going into Europe. But that's only temporary, because I think they'll recover, and I think weather conditions will probably be a bit more normal into the future. Then on the local market, we sell no raw sugar. We only sell VHP, which is brown sugar, and refined sugar. And that's really the sugar that Sifiso had alluded to, that's part of this master plan discussion. It goes into the direct market, which is your ShopRite store, where you purchase a packet of sugar. Your indirect market, or your industrial market, where it gets processed, that would be your soft drink sector or your food sector. And then, yeah, the rest of it is I guess those are the 2 main categories. Molasses, on the other hand, is sold pretty much to companies that are either owned by the millers or have some form of shareholding in the milling companies, and that is beneficiated. But unfortunately for the growers in the industry, we don't share in that beneficiation. We sell the molasses at an industry price, and then you've got your alcohol producers, for example, making potable alcohol from that, and that goes into the alcohol sector. Now, what we need to do in the master plan, and that was something that was discussed earlier, is to try and open this regulation to include the ability for the industry to produce alternative products to sugar and molasses. And here, this red quadrant there is really an opportunity, I think, for us to participate in these alternative products, of which, for example, sustainable aviation fuels is one of them. Okay, so back to the topic of the day. Aviation fuel, sustainable aviation fuel in South Africa has been investigated, and SA Kangaroos was part of this investigation that was done by RSB, which is the Roundtable for Sustainable Biomaterials. RSB has quite a big footprint in sustainable production of various products, and obviously aviation fuel from agricultural products doesn't attract that value if it's not produced in a sustainable way. The whole selling point here for SAF, as we call it, is that it is sustainable, and I think that's where RSB comes in, and that's why they were such a good partner in our study, is because they could give those expertise as to when is an agricultural product deemed to be sustainable, what certification do you require in order to link into that market, and for our case, what has to be done in order for sugarcane to be certified sustainable. Then the WWF did another study, and both of these are available on their websites. I put their URLs there for you to download and to actually have a look what the game is and what it's about and how far along they are. But they also analyzed the sugar industry and used A molasses, which is part of our sugar production mix before it becomes crystal sugar, as a feedstock in SAF. And they've modeled that in that report on the right-hand side. So also a very interesting study. What you'll pick up from that study is that our feedstock from sugarcane is actually very price competitive at this stage. And that's why we're so excited about this, and that's why we've gotten the IDC and the DTIC on board with funding, because we believe that this is a real opportunity for the industry to convert those massive tonnages of export sugar that we're currently selling at a loss into a product that is sustainable and also then achieves a value that can add value to the growers and millers in the sector. Now, this is really the big problem, right? So if you look at that top figure, currently the ratio between local market and export market is 74-26%, and 74% of our sugar gets sold on the local market, and that's largely due to these initiatives in the master plan, but it wasn't like that a while ago. 3 or 4 years ago, we were actually on a 50-50 split. So in other words, we sold 1 million tons of our 2 million tons that we produce on the world market, and the big problem is that we can't compete against Brazil. No country in the world can actually compete against Brazil, and Brazil, with its elaborate ethanol program that started in the 70s, has this ability to switch between sugar and ethanol as world prices dictate. So Brazil is so big on the world market that they set that number 11 price that I alluded to, and it is pretty much on their break even, or even slightly above that. So they've got that ability to make money at the world price, whereas all other countries, or 90% of the other countries in the world that produce sugar, don't have that ability. And a while ago, we did an analysis of our cost of production versus that of the number 11, and you can see there about a 11-cent differential in cost of production. And like I said, those are old and very average figures. But that is the problem. We don't want to sell sugar on the world market. We want to sell it locally. And if we can't grow our local market to absorb all of this export sugar, we need an alternative avenue, alternative product that can be made from the sugarcane that goes into that export sugar, and that is viable. So what have we looked at over the years? Ethanol for road transport was always one of those that we had looked at, and actually my PhD back in 2010 focused on the ethanol production in South Africa, and it's now 12 years later and there's still no ethanol being produced. And the problem is that you need subsidies from government to get started at least, and then you need to be cost competitive against the countries like Brazil in order to stay in business. And that's what they've done very successfully, but we, I think, in South Africa haven't gotten our policies right, and I think there hasn't been that incentive in play. However, at the current fuel price and the current cane price, you could actually produce ethanol in South Africa and sell that in a cost competitive way. But again, we know why the oil price is high. Is this something that will remain high and at above $100 a barrel is really the question. and what happens if it doesn't? What happens if it drops back to $60 or $50 a barrel, which it wasn't, so long ago that we actually had those oil prices? Then suddenly we need a support mechanism to keep us in business. As I said, aviation fuel has that opportunity to use our export tonnage in order to produce, firstly, ethanol, and from ethanol you then have a ATJ pathway, alcohol to jet pathway, where you can produce your sustainable aviation fuel. Our analyses show that we could produce at that 50-50 ratio. As I said, currently it's not the case, but it was the case a while ago, around 700 million liters of ethanol in South Africa. And from that, you would convert that into SAF, and you could produce around 440 million liters of SAF in the country. Just to give you an idea, pre-COVID levels, OR Tambo uses around 2 billion liters of jet fuel every year. And as I said, pre-COVID, that was when we had many flights coming in and out of South Africa. There would be an opportunity with ATJ, with that pathway, you can blend about 50% SAF into the fuel mix. But the big market is not in South Africa. The big markets are in either Europe, Asia, or the Americas, where governments are really driving this as part of their carbon neutral program for 2050. Okay, our viability studies in this study with RSB, WWF, and Boeing really focused on the certification criteria for our industry. And in the sugar industry, we've got a farm management system called SAS Farms. It's really a sustainable farming practice guide to assist growers in their day-to-day operations and to ensure that they move towards more sustainable farming practices. So in that figure, you can see the Midlands areas are heavily involved in SAS Farms, and they're actually doing very well. And what we try to do in our analysis is to compare SAS Farms and the RSB certification standards in order to try and understand how much overlap there is, and if there's overlap, what are the areas of overlap, and what needs to be done in order for farmers in our sugarcane industry to become certified under RSB. So you can see there quite a few topics overlap between SAS Farms and RSB, and just to note that SAS Farms is not a certification, it's a management tool, but it could, and I think the plan is for us at least in the growing sector, to start pushing certification into the future. We're seeing more and more demand for certified sugar even coming from international buyers of our export sugar. So this is something that will continue growing into the future, and obviously the premium associated with aviation fuel will be massive if you can show that you are sustainably certified. Then from a production process point of view, we analyzed the greenhouse gas emissions for sugarcane farming. And in order to qualify, and this was really a high-level overview for sustainable aviation fuels, you had to meet certain criteria of EU RED, which is the EU standard for SAF, and CORSIA, which is sort of the other standard, the global standard. We looked at various scenarios and compared 3 types of sugarcane farming in order to try and understand what the CO2 emissions are, so the gas emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, gram per megajoule of SAF that is produced, and to see where we can either tweak production processes or allocate weights to greenhouse gas emissions a bit differently. You can see from this bottom figure that irrigated sugarcane is very close to being excluded from SAF just because of the electricity that they use for their irrigation purposes. And as we know, this electricity comes largely from Eskom, and Eskom in turn uses coal to generate electricity. So that's the linkage that goes through the value chain in order to calculate that. So there would have to be some tweaking, I guess, of either the production process or the way in which irrigated sugarcane growers procure their electricity in order to be able to qualify for that. From a fertilizer perspective, we also looked at the various fertilizers that growers use, and we try to understand, in the current practices, what is important to use, how do you use it, how much of it do you use, and does it disqualify you from participating here? Again, you can see the irrigated guys had electricity as their major component. Now, there is a way to get around it. If your ethanol facility in the irrigated areas also produces sugar, then your greenhouse gas calculation tool allows you to allocate some of the greenhouse gases to your sugar production and not so much to your ethanol production, which then ensures that your ethanol production becomes a bit cleaner on paper, I guess. So there's a way around it, but still to highlight that irrigated sugarcane, especially using Eskom electricity, may be a problem. On the right-hand side of that graph, you can also see that cane burning should be one of those practices that should be reduced. In our industry at the moment, as part of our regulations, growers get penalized if they deliver a high fiber cane to the sugar mill. And that's really because a miller struggles to extract the optimum amount of sucrose or sugar from the sugar cane if the fiber percentage is too high. So that's why 90% of the growers in the industry burn their sugarcane fields before harvest to get rid of this excess fiber, which is a penalty to them in the system. So again, an opportunity for the industry to relook at that, relook at the method in which growers are being paid, and to try and streamline that more with a modern world. If we do a pie chart on all of those, just to put it into perspective, you can see again really the figure above, just on a pie chart, how big the electricity and burning components are of sugarcane being produced, and how that would be reduced if you would go into green cane harvesting. So definitely something we've highlighted to the growers. Again, it comes at a huge cost. It is less efficient to do that. But many other countries, cane-producing countries in the world, are on a no-burn regime, and I think in future we'll have to push that quite hard. The big question then was, do we qualify or don't we qualify? Again, here the emission standards set by EU RED and CORSIA. You can see that at the top, the baseline for EU RED is 94 grams CO2 per megajoule produced, and for CORSIA it's slightly lower, 89 grams CO2 per megajoule produced. The irrigated cane, very close, as I said. You need to be within 60% of the standard to qualify, very close to actually being excluded from that. But the dry land in both scenarios, both burning and green cane harvesting, actually did qualify. So those are good signs for us, and that's why we decided to bring this project to the master plan in order to try and push that further into both pre-feasibility and feasibility studies, with the intention of producing ethanol as a base product and then converting that into SAF, or sustainable aviation fuels. What is disappointing in this, and since the study was done in 2018, is that the EU has decided to exclude any food crop from SAF. Now, you could argue, well, our export sugar isn't really a food crop, it's a surplus to our requirements. But again, a lot of the consultants that we've discussed this with and that we've interviewed in order to do the work for our aviation fuel study have cautioned us that the EU is very strict on this. They want to avoid further reductions in the rainforest, for example, in Brazil, for more sugarcane production that would go into such a lucrative market. So they've got other agendas in order to try and deal with that. On the CORSIA side, however, the standards aren't that specific, and there are also massive markets that we will be looking at in our study, and hopefully we'll find a home somewhere there. We've already had discussions with international airlines who've expressed interest to be part of the solution, but also to partner in purchasing or procurement arrangements once we get everything going. So very positive signs that are being made, and I'm quite positive that we can get away from exporting sugar and using that sugarcane then for alternative products. So then really in conclusion, we've got more than enough sugarcane to get into this game, and we've highlighted that. I mean, with the carryover cane scenario as it stands at the moment, growers are even looking at either tapping off cane juice from the mills in order to open up capacity, or, as Marilyn has highlighted, building their own mills on farms in order to try and get around that bottleneck that has been created. The sugarcane price is very competitive at this stage, and also works well, hopefully, in our modeling on SAF because of the legislative requirements that are in place. So hopefully we can compete against that. We have discussed the Sugar Act and Agreement. They have to be amended. They have to be opened up to include a bit, I guess, less stricter regulations, and not just sugar and molasses, but alternative products. The master plan has been a great vehicle to highlight all of these things, and the funding opportunity has been realized with the IDC, so we're very positive about that. And that is now well underway, so hopefully we'll get to a conclusion soon. The big one is the certification, and as I said earlier, without being sustainable or classified independently as being sustainable, there is no market. So that's a vehicle that agriculture, I think in general in South Africa, has to get on, but more specifically the sugar industry, and one of those elements is green cane harvesting. Cedric, that's it from my side. Welcome to ask some questions later on, and contact me if you have any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Thomas Funke. Usually there's confusion because people usually say that when an industry exports, it does so in a lucrative manner, but for the sugar industry, it's unique in a sense that we prefer the local optimization of the market. When we say local market, we refer to SACU, which comprises your Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, Eswatini, and South Africa. That's our primary market. That's why we would say that we prefer to rechannel the sugar that would have exported to other products. For an example, in the last season, we produced 1.8 million tons of sugar, and then of that, 400,000 was exported at a loss. Our last presenter is Dr. Kitty Foxy from SMRI. Please come onto the podium.
Thank you so much, Cedric, and thank you to all of you for coming to hear us today. Please excuse me, my sinuses are not quite what I'd like them to be, so if I'm a bit nasal, I hope you'll forgive me. Okay, so I'm going to speak to you about a project which is being done at the Sugar Milling Research Institute, which is based here, as Cedric said, near KZN on the Howard College campus. Just quickly, the Sugar Milling Research Institute is an industry-funded research organization which serves the R&D, consulting, and analytical needs of the South African sugar millers. This project actually was initiated before the master plan process was formalized, so it is fortuitous that it fits very well into what is required within the master plan process. But it, in a way, it is running somewhat independently, and I need to acknowledge the funders of this. The money came from the Department of Science and Innovation, which we're very grateful for, but we are working very closely with the University of Stellenbosch and our partner there, Professor Johan Goergens, who's also got a Saatchi chair in sugarcane biorefining, who is really one of the main visionaries and motivators of the work that's being done. So let me just jump into it then. What is the purpose of our project? Well, this industry knows quite well how to make bioethanol and co-generated power. These are the products which are really on the table in terms of diversification. We know how to do it because we understand the technology, we understand the markets, we understand how much it costs, we have some experience in doing it. But what we also understand fairly well is that co-generated power and bioethanol, the economics at the moment in South Africa are not going to be what help us to find new homes for the approximately 500,000 tons of sugar that we need to do other things with and export at a loss. So the idea is to put some alternate products on the table, some what we're calling non-conventional products. And that would be things like platform chemicals, bioplastics, or food additives. And some of these things we've had described by the earlier speakers. And what does it mean to put them on the table? Well, it means that the industry needs to have some sense of how the markets and the economics work, because the truth is there's so many different things that you can do with a sucrose molecule. It's an incredible molecule. You can make, from a chemist's perspective, you can probably make anything you wanted out of it. But the question is, how do you do it in a way that pays off your investment? And that's something that the sugar industry doesn't really know for the non-conventional products. So the idea for our work was to say, how can we create more options that can be considered, understanding that they may not necessarily be taken up. Okay, so what is our new product? I'm not sure what's happened with my animations there, but never mind. It doesn't really matter. The idea is that if we have a new product concept, we need to understand its market, its technology, its environment, its finance, and its policy. In the past, when we've done diversification research, and Marilyn referred to many, many, many years of looking at different products, but it's been very much from a technology push perspective. What we've realized is that it's not about what you can make from sugarcane, it's how you can make money from sugarcane, which is a little bit of a different issue. So in order to work that out, we need to understand these 5 components. So starting with the first one, the market component, you need to understand who's going to buy it, what the characteristics are that they're looking for. Thomas has mentioned about sustainability certification. Does it matter whether it's a sustainable product or not? And importantly, how much are they going to pay for it? You need to understand the technology, how it's made, whether it's a licensable technology, whether the license is available, how much it's going to cost, and very importantly, the strong connection between market and technology, which is can you make your product at the price that your market is prepared to pay? Importantly, environment. Both from a regulatory perspective, can you make products in such a way that you comply with whatever the relevant regulations are? But as I've said, the link between what the market is looking for and the environmental characteristics of your product and your process is really important. So our study looks at that component as well. Finance is an interesting one. Understand that I'm an academic chemical engineer. I don't know anything at all about money, or certainly didn't before this project. But if you read the newspapers, you'll find an enormous amount going on about, sustainable finance or this big sustainable finance transaction for this company. What does that mean? Is that something we can access? Is it something that is going to have a meaningful impact on an investment project that we might want to undertake that involves creating new products from sugarcane? What would be the quantum? How do you go about getting it? What hoops do you have to jump through? What reporting is required? What frameworks are involved? So that was all stuff that we didn't know in advance, and something that we've considered in the project. And then finally, the last component is around policy, the regulatory environment. And Thomas has also mentioned about certain blockages in our current industry regulations that would limit the ability to make things other than sugar and molasses from sugarcane. But there are other issues that we need to consider about the regulatory framework for the production and the marketing of the particular products that we're interested in. So the idea is to have a look at all of these components rather than whether we can make it. In fact, what I should have mentioned up front is that anything that we've considered in our study should already have a licensable technology that can be used. There are other things that one could develop in the future, but as I don't know, I think everybody said, our focus right now is getting our industry out of ICU and into a stable space where we can consider growth and great and exciting innovations in the future. Right now, we just need to work out how to keep it going. Okay, so the final question that comes out of all of this is, as an investor, rather than as a research engineer, will this investment opportunity make some profit for the person who's going to put their money on the table? And this is a very different approach from what we've ever done in the past. Can we make it? Now we're asking, can we make money from it? So that's really what we've been trying to do in a nutshell. But I think it's important to point out that our ambitions go much beyond making money. They go to making a difference. And it's important to realize that sugarcane it's a remarkable crop. It's one of the most efficient converters of sunlight into chemical energy. And that energy comes in a form that's relatively easy to extract, or if there are any millers in the room, they might argue about how easy it is. But we certainly know how to do it. And you can get, using technology which is very well understood, a very, very pure form at a relatively low cost. It's a remarkable resource that we have. It also happens to be something that is one of the few large-scale crops that we can have in KZN, our beautiful province, that creates income, that creates livelihoods, that supports all our people. And we could be using this resource to make a difference in terms of climate, to make a difference in terms of emissions and waste which goes into our environment. So these are all the things we want to take this opportunity, this pause that we have to do something different, to make a difference to our industry, our people, and the world at large. So it's not just about making money, and that is something that we're really building into the thinking of how we are doing this research. Okay, so that's kind of the nice picture of the background. What exactly are we doing? Well, we're trying to create the concept of a product pipeline where you start off with a whole lot of different options. In one of Marilyn's slides, she had a list of some of the many different things you can make out of sugar, sucrose, or sugarcane. And there's some slides which come from, I think, the US Department of Energy or something like that, where there's literally hundreds of things on the page that you could theoretically make from sugar, from sucrose. Our starting point is to build techno-economic models of the process of making that product from sucrose. So that's the starting point. So our first step is this, what we call the build step, where you build a model. And there could be all kinds of different products, different technologies, or whatever. So the first step is to build the model. Then the difficulty is that once you've built the model, some of them are going to look interesting, some not so good. Maybe you need to tweak the scale, whatever. But it's very difficult when you've got lots of them to say, well, which ones are the ones that we should focus our efforts on? Because this is a lot of work for one product, never mind 30 or 40. So then there's a step which benchmarks them, gets them into a format that you can compare. I won't go into the details of what's involved, but there's a benchmarking step from which the ones which start looking interesting start to bubble to the top. It doesn't mean because they're interesting that they will be viable, that they will be feasible, that anybody will want to make them. But at least it's a basis for saying, let's look at those ones first. So we have a prioritization. And from that prioritization, we choose a smaller number that can then go into a screening step. The screening step becomes more rigorous. We have to collect some high-level market intelligence to understand who's going to buy the product, how much they're going to pay for it, and whether there's any chance, based on our techno-economic models, of being able to produce the product from sugarcane in South Africa at the price the market is asking. And from that screening step, we're then able to select ones that look like they have a chance of being feasible. And those then progress through to a desktop study, where we start looking in more detail at the specifics of the market, at the scale at which the economics start to make sense, engaging with technology partners, understanding whether the licenses are actually available or not, whether we have off-takers who would be willing to come on board, etc. Understanding that this is a group of researchers, we're not commercial developers, because the final step, once we've finished our desktop studies, is to make a recommendation as to whether we think this is worth taking forward. And at that point, we believe that we'll have put more products on the table that the commercial guys can look at and say, okay, this is something that we really want to take further. So the next question is, who's doing the work? Well, the first part is really done, or has been done over many, many years through collaborators, affiliated institutions, some with SMRI funding, some with other sources of funding, but there's probably about 40 techno-economic models of different products from sucrose around the place, and that's been done by students and postgraduates at the various universities. The middle component has been what we're actually doing in this project. That was supposed to be my previous slide, the red ring. That's actually what our project is looking at, is the benchmark, screen, and desktop study components. And that's being done by postgraduate researchers from Stellenbosch University and researchers at the Sugar Milling Research Institute, plus a bunch of consultants who deal with the bits that we really are not competent to deal with. And then the feasibility study, that's not going to be us. That's commercial project developers. They will, if we do a good enough job, or and able to find things that look good on paper, then they can take that forward. But that won't be our responsibility. So where are we in this project at the moment? We went through the benchmarking and screening process. We had, I think, 20 products that we started with benchmarking. 15 of those went into screening, and we had enough budget from the DSI project to take 2 into the desktop study, and that's what we're busy with at the moment. Volume's gone quite loud here. Okay, so the 2 products that we're looking at the moment are going through this detailed interrogation where we're looking at the techno-economic models, the finances, the regulatory environment, etc. We're busy with that at the moment. Within the next 2 months, we will have finalized and get to the point where we can make the recommendations on those top 2 products. It's also important to note that there were more than 2 that came out of the screening that looked interesting. SAF was one of them, so we're not dealing with that because that's already being dealt with by other industry structures, and there were others as well. And in fact, there were ones that never even made it into our benchmarking and screening process, which may potentially be interesting. So there's a lot of scope for future projects, because the idea is really to fill this product pipeline so that on our dinner table, there's really more than 1 or 2 options that the industry can look at and see what makes sense. So just to give you a high level where we are with our 2 products, I'm not going to go into the details. I think for this form it doesn't matter particularly, but it's just quite interesting to see that the 2 that bubble to the top have very, very different characteristics. One happens to be a food additive and the other a bioplastic. Of those, they have very different volume characteristics. The food additive is fairly small. The bioplastic would have to be very large to make the economics work. The local market for the food additive is significant. But for the bioplastic, the local market's not at all well developed, which means that from a export volume perspective, we would have to probably export about half of the food additive, but really most of the bioplastic. So that influences who you need to be talking to, who you need to be working with in order to make these things go. And this goes towards the story that we're trying to tell of having cases on the table or options on the table that the industry knows how to start interrogating. The capital cost in the food additive is moderate, whereas for the bioplastic it's high. And talking to what Thomas presented in his previous presentation, the sustainability certification is quite different for the 2 products. For the food additive, the market doesn't care because it would be competing with other bio-based products. But for the bioplastic, you're competing with petrochemical products which are cheaper, therefore the market really cares. They simply will not pay the price that you need to make your economics work if you don't have sustainability certification. So it's really interesting how, depending on what type of product you're dealing with, the entire business case looks completely different. So where to next? Well, as I said, we very nearly finished the desktop study for 2, and we hope that that's going to progress to feasibilities if we're able to show that either of those 2 look interesting enough. But as I say, there's options to put a whole lot of more products into the pipeline and to grow the number of options on the table for our industry. And then, I guess, put some steel in the ground and start really contributing to the South African bioeconomy and keeping this industry not just alive, but growing from strength to strength. So that's all I'm going to say at the moment. I'm very happy to take questions and discussions later, but I just need to acknowledge the DSI for the funding that went into this work and for the support that they've given us in making this project go forward.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kitty Foxy. Exciting times. Thank you for sharing that information with us in terms of ensuring our sustainability as the industry. Ladies and gentlemen of the audience, at this time, it is your opportunity to raise some questions. This is how we're going to do it. You will state your name and where you're from and clearly direct your question to one of our panel members. And you must be aware as well that you will get a chance to interact with them individually as soon as this session ends, so you can hold your questions and speak to them individually after this. By a show of hands, can I see how many people would like to ask questions or make an input so that I can see how many rounds of questions we're going to have? Don't be shy. There's no stupid question, there's no clever question, there's no genius question. We're seeking clarity, or your input is critical as well. Okay, I see a hand at the back. Here, the second line. Is there another hand? I just want to establish, because if there were going to be more than one round, I would make it 5 questions at a time. So I see we've got 2 hands. Do we have a roving mic, or do they have to come to the front? Okay. If the 2 participants can come to the front, you'll stand in a line, and then when you're done with your cue, and then you can take your seat, and then the relevant panelist will answer your question. Thank you. In that order.
Hi, my name is Alma. I'm from the CSR. Thanks, I learned a lot. But I'm just really curious. I can't remember who it was, but someone was mentioning deflavored sugarcane juice. And I'm just like, is that just meaning it's not sweet? Surely it still has to be sweet. Like, yeah, I don't know. Like, I feel like sugar is pretty deflavored already. So can you just clarify what that means for a total dance in the sugarcane industry? And then my other question is about the aviation fuel. You said you had to be within 60% of the numbers, and then your slide said 59, and you were like, oh, that's really close. And then the ones underneath said like 72 and 74, and you said they were within the range. So I think I didn't understand the math there about how close we are to that. But thank you so much. It was really interesting. Thanks.
Can we have the gentleman who does, ask your question. Let's just ask a question.
Hello everyone, I'm Xolis Mgongoma from KZN. My first question is directed to Dr. Naido about the survival of the biofuels as we're coming to the 5th industrial revolutions. We've got Teslas now, they are running with electricity. So until it isn't like we are trying to solve the problem, that we already got the solution, since we are going to now electrical cars, and I'm not sure about aviation. It may be viable to aviation. And then my second question, I won't be sure between the 2 speakers who may address it, but anyone, I would be glad if they may take the question, is about the land issue. So as we will be, if the biofuel industry is well established, there will be more demand. And also, since we've got like limited land whereby we are planting like sugarcane. So only a side is, but there's a lot of about diminishing effects. So we're gonna like eventually have a problem, because we're gonna subject that land to monoculture, overuse of fertilizers and everything. So shouldn't we be maybe first focus on the policies that will allow other people from disadvantaged backgrounds to have access to become like sugarcane growers? Because like since I grew up, I've always known like the same farmers of sugarcanes, like ever since. Like I think my grandfather was working there, and my father also worked for them, and I also like was about to work for them. Like it's the same farmers. It does not change. And even those farmers, what they do, they would go to their employees and buy their land to farm more and then still employ them. So shouldn't we focus on policies that would allow people who've got land, who are capable also of farming sugarcane, to have access, and also maybe something like a black market or anything like to allow them to have access to sell their products of sugarcane and everything?
Thank you to the... Oh, we've got a dead person. All right, go ahead.
So it's less of a question, more of a comment and then a warning. I'll start with the warning. There's another session after this, and you guys have taken quite a bit of time, so if you don't mind, I'm chairing the next session. But a comment on the biofuels, or the aviation fuel, to Dr. Funk. I think it was clear that you highlighted that there isn't a reality of a biofuels future for the transportation or the road transportation. But we've done a study recently on commercial biofuels potential in Gauteng. And it was clear from that study that ethanol biofuels, whether for the aviation industry or the transportation industry, is unlikely for a region like Gauteng because of the logistical cost. So have you all factored that into the sugarcane master plan because it's a potentially huge market opportunity that you're building an aviation fuel product for that might disappear. So,
Thank you. You know, it's like you had a premonition that I was about to engage you to give us 7 minutes because we started 7 minutes late because of connectivity issue. I know you agree. Thank you. Can we have our panel members answer from there? You can press your mic.
I'll try and answer the deflavored one. I'm not a technical expert, but the actual cane juice does have a taste to it. So it's just trying to remove it because it needs to be neutral, and it will go in as a sweetener. So it'll still have the same effect. But the actual cane juice, the challenge is to get rid of that taste, so it doesn't impact. So when you have your mango juice, you don't have a sugarcane taste.
I can go next, yeah. So your question is valid. EU RED requires a greenhouse gas saving of at least 60% relative to whatever I guess you were producing before. So they've got different categories. I've got it here. If your production process started prior to 2015, you need to save 50% of your greenhouse gas emissions in order to qualify. And obviously you need to prove that. Then any production process post 5 October 2015, you're on 60%. And then from 1 January 2021, you had to be on 65%. So they're sort of ratcheting it up depending on when you're starting, forcing you to use newer technologies in order to make a bigger saving. So that's really where that comes from. On the Gauteng issue, that's absolutely correct. I think the transport differential is a big problem. As part of the master plan, we are actually talking to one of the fuel companies. As you know, we're importing roughly 70 to 80% of our final product, petrol and diesel, into the country. And a lot of the existing refineries are looking at repurposing their infrastructure. So one of the discussions is on one of the refineries here in Durban, to try and see what they can do differently and if we can partner with them. But again, they've run their numbers, and road transport, that risk of a low oil price is very big for any investor. So if we can't fix that by some form of safety net or maybe a support measure that in times of high oil prices takes some money and puts it away for those times with lower oil prices, it's not going to be a starter for anyone. Especially without a subsidy, and that's why the aviation fuel market is so exciting. But what is a good caution, obviously, is the nature of our industry. 70% is rain-fed. So in drought years, cane production drops dramatically. And what do you do then if you need to supply Delta Airlines in the States with their fuel requirement? And those are things we need to work on. Those are obviously issues going forward.
Maybe I can just make a comment on the question around electric cars. And you're very much correct. There is an introduction of electric cars into the country. And we would like to see more of that as well. But in some of the conversations with the motor sector, I think we are a long way from average motorist in South Africa driving an electric car, and also the cost of those vehicles. So I think you're correct, but also there's a time frame before it becomes a norm in South Africa and being priced viably. But having said that, I think all the comments made around biofuels for road transport, we concur with that, and it's a non-starter even in South Africa without the necessary support mechanisms in place, and hence they're looking at the alternative products. And just a comment, and we can always talk about it more offline. I think certainly from SAFTA side, and I think from the industry as well, new entrants, growers or new growers into the industry, it's not something that is frowned upon, and certainly can be looked at if there are opportunities for those farmers to participate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank the panel. The session was very informative and then very lively indeed. Thank you to the audience. Thank you for allowing us those extra few minutes. The situation was beyond our control. Thank you.